I'm Professor Maggie Livingston, and I'm the Faculty Director at the DePaul Center for Animal Law, and I want to welcome you to our symposium this year. Our topic today is Animals as Food, the legal treatment of animals in contemporary agribusiness and factory farming. We're very pleased to have a very talented and impressive group of nationally recognized speakers who will discuss the various facets of this topic. Our keynote speaker at lunch will be Professor Gary Francione of the Rutgers Newark Law School, who is internationally acclaimed for his writing on animal rights and animal welfare. Before introducing the first panel, I would like to thank a number of generous donors who made contributions in support of the symposium. Dr. Florence Wissick Dunbar, who received her JD from DePaul in 1945, remembered the center with a testamentary bequest that enabled the center to begin its important work of exploring the proper role of the law in protecting animals. In addition, certain individuals made gifts specifically to support today's event. Pat Spaggett of Oak Park, Illinois, Dennis Shear of North Aurora, Illinois, Professors Marlene and Norm Nicholson of Evanston, Illinois, Ginger Grace and David Rosenstock of New York, New York, and Professors John Jenkins and Nance Mueller Jenkins of Chicago, Illinois. I'd also like to thank some individuals who were instrumental in supporting, planning, and setting up today's event. Graduate Research Fellow and DePaul Law grad Brett Harrison Davinger spent many hours securing our impressive speakers, arranging for their transportation and housing, publicizing the symposium, and generally overseeing all details of the symposium and bringing it to fruition. Marketing consultant Kathy Stanton, working with marketing director Courtney Moore and webmaster Dennis Stone, applied her creative talents in developing our polished and effective website and publicity materials. And our wonderful DePaul Law students energetically got the word out about the event. I want to thank particularly the Student Animal Legal Defense Fund of DePaul, Sarah Wilson, and Alyssa Newswanger for their efforts. One final note before we begin our presentations. Our goal today is to provide a balanced program representing a variety of points of view on our topics, some of which of course are quite controversial. We hope to generate a wide-ranging discussion of possible solutions to the difficult issues presented by slaughterhouses, food labeling, undercover investigations of animal cruelty, and proposed bans on certain foods such as foie gras. And I'm going to move into the introductions of our first panelists. We have Lisa Weinberger, who is counsel with Compassion Over Killing. She grew up in Tokyo, Japan, and also in Maryland, and developed an affinity for animals early on, became a vegetarian at age 5. She got her official start in animal law as a litigation intern for Compassion Over Killing. As part of the COK's legal team, she works to challenge the widespread abuse of farmed animals and egregious agricultural practices through litigation on other legal avenues. Then we'll hear from Amy Gong, who is an associate with the law offices of Lawrence M. Rubin. She co-chairs the Animals and Agriculture Subcommittee of the American Bar Association Animal Law Committee, and she became involved in animal law in law school, during which she clerked at the Legal Environmental Aid Foundation, the Humane Society of the United States, and Best Friends Animal Society. Third, Dr. Tom Parks, DVM, who is with the HSUS Agricultural Council for Colorado. He is engaged in private practice of veterinary medicine, focusing on farm animal and companion animals. He's past president of the Colorado Veterinary Medical Association, chair of the HSUS Colorado Agriculture Council, a member of the Cattlemen's Beef Board, and raises great grass-fed cattle under the name Sun Prairie Beef. Finally, Professor David Faber from the Michigan State University College of Law. He has written numerous articles and books dealing with animal issues, including such topics as animal cruelty, wildlife law, the use of animals for scientific research, and international control of animal trade. His books include the Casebook, Animal Law, Welfare, Interest, and Rights, now in its 2nd edition. So please join me in welcoming our first panel speakers.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Weinberger. I'm here with Compassion Over Killing. We're a national nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. that focuses exclusively on farmed animal issues. I'm with COK's legal legal advocacy program, which means it's my job to use existing legal tools to improve the lives of farmed animals. And today I just want to take a few moments of your time to speak about investigations and why they're so important for groups like COK, and not only from a legal standpoint, but also for giving us rare insight into how the lives of animals that are raised and slaughtered for food. So, first question, why farm animals? Whenever I tell people that I do animal law, the first assumption people make is that I do something to help dogs and cats. And while I love dogs and cats, organizations like COK focus on farmed animal issues simply because the issue is so much larger. Farmed animals constitute over 98% of the animals killed in the U.S. each year, totaling about 10 billion animals. Farmed animals routinely suffer egregious abuse, not just outright cruelty, but inhumane standard practices as well. And thirdly, farmed animals often lack legal and meaningful protections, as I will detail in just a few minutes. So it's COK's mission to target the most egregious abuse happening or affecting the greatest number of animals. But it's also one of our goals to simply shed insight into the very nature of industrial animal agriculture. I'm going to show just a couple of clips. I know they're really difficult to watch, but I hope that you'll bear with me for a moment because I think it sheds a very important insight into how animals are raised, and COK is one of a very small group of organizations that's able to capture such footage. So this first clip, before you watch it, I just want to say that with this clip of the California slaughterhouse, that we captured a lot of workers inhumanely euthanizing cows by stepping on their nostrils to suffocate them, improper stunning practices, and workers spraying hot water on cows and repeatedly shocking them, lifting their tails. And this is not an isolated incident. Every time groups such as COK penetrate the closed doors of factory farms, such abuses are uncovered. So just bear with me for one moment and I'll show a clip of this.
At U.S. slaughterhouses, federal law requires death to be quick. When cows are shot in the head, the process should cause immediate unconsciousness. At Central Valley, countless deaths we documented were slow and agonizing. Rather than properly stunning animals, Central Valley sends cows who are still kicking and thrashing after they've been shot down a conveyor belt where they are hoisted, kicking and struggling before their throats are eventually slit. The meat from these cows is then shipped to schools through the USDA's National School Lunch Program and distributed through other federal programs. Some meat is also sold to In-N-Out Burger.
So I think you get the idea of that, and that is, again, a slaughterhouse in California. I have a second clip here, and this is of a factory farm. It's actually a Iowa pig breeding facility, and this footage was released in 2012. Since that time, Iowa has actually enacted an ag gag law that makes exposés like the one I'm about to show you criminal. And I just want to remind you before you see this clip that everything you see is standard practice. So there are pigs intensively combined in what are called gestation crates, where their crates are so tiny they can't even turn around or engage in basic natural behaviors. Workers are pictured ripping off piglets' testicles and causing herniated intestines, which are simply pushed back inside of their abdomens and then literally taped up. And you'll even see some forced cannibalism. But again, these are all standard practices that are perfectly legal.
In late 2011, A compassion over killing investigator worked inside a pig factory farm in Iowa, where thousands of female pigs are kept nearly immobilized in tiny metal cages and treated like mere piglet-producing machines. Intensively confined, artificially inseminated, and denied the ability to perform many of their most natural behaviors, including even simply turning around. They suffer physically and mentally. Being moved from one crate to another, you can see this neglected pig's hooves have overgrown to a crippling length. After spending months in gestation crates, breeding pigs are moved to farrowing crates, which are also barely bigger than their bodies, where they'll give birth and nurse their piglets through the metal bars. Conditions are often filthy and fly-infested. Standard industry practices include chopping off the piglets' tails, as well as cutting up the male's genitals without any pain relief. These painful mutilations are performed directly in front of their mothers, who, unable to help from their cages, grunt in obvious distress. Poorly performed castrations often result in herniated intestines. Workers use their fingers to shove the organs back inside the piglets' bodies, and then they wrap tape around the bleeding wounds. Denied proper veterinary care, countless sick or injured piglets are left to suffer.
So I think that's a pretty good little insight into how factory farms raising or pig breeding facilities look. But after seeing those two clips, you might wonder why these things are permitted to continue. Well, part of the answer is that there simply is very little legal protection afforded to farmed animals. So the first law I have up here, the Animal Welfare Act, that sounds like something that might be pertinent to farmed animals, but in fact it actually accepts all farmed animals, so livestock, poultry, and any animal used or intended for food. So what that means is this law does not apply to the 98% of animals that are killed each year in the United States. The second law, Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, is a law that requires animals be rendered insensible to pain prior to slaughter. However, and this is a big however, it doesn't apply to poultry, which constitute a vast majority of the animals that are slaughtered each year. It also exempts fish, rabbits, and some other animals. So the Humane Methods of Slaughter Act, even if it were perfectly enforced, which it's not, applies to only a small minority of animals raised for food. This last law I have up here is the 28-hour law. And this is a law that prohibits animals from being transported in excess of 28 consecutive hours without unloading for 5 hours for food, water, and rest. In 2005, COK did an investigation which revealed widespread violation of this law with no consequence. Subsequently, COK issued a petition to the USDA which said it would start protecting animals transported long distances by truck, but there have actually been no enforcement action since the 1950s. So I've been talking a lot about what laws aren't doing for farmed animals, but are there laws that we can use to protect them? Fortunately, the answer is yes. State animal cruelty laws sometimes do apply to farmed animals, unlike the Animal Welfare Act. However, state laws vary, and many exempt common or accepted standard practices. So no matter how egregious or how painful a procedure like the ones you've just seen, they remain legal. Unfair business practices also, or practices laws also vary by state, but we've had some success in recent years applying these to cases of animal cruelty. In 2009, COK investigated a Santa Cruz broiler chicken hatchery called Cruz Hatcheries. And this is an operation that was providing or supplying broiler chickens to stores such as Whole Foods. Despite supplying to these so-called higher welfare retailers, COK unveiled some of the worst possible abuses going on at this hatchery. Birds were intentionally drowned in buckets, mangled on machinery, left for hours to suffer with horrible injuries without euthanasia or veterinary care and so forth. So with this investigative footage in hand, we were actually able to argue that CalCruz was violating the California Unfair Business Practices Law by essentially taking shortcuts using inhumane and illegal practices that gave them a competitive advantage in the marketplace. So our settlement with CalCruz on this basis marks the first time that allegations of animal cruelty were successfully resolved using the civil law. So I hope I'm illustrating clearly for you why undercover investigations are of such central importance to groups like COK that advocate on behalf of farm animals. Not only do they give us the tools that we need to go forward with criminal and civil actions, but they give us the facts and the knowledge and insight into the lives of farmed animals that we can use as the bases of our education and outreach efforts. So as a final example, I want to quickly point to a very recent investigation that COK released of a hatchery called Bell & Evans. And Bell & Evans here, as you can see on their website, touts proudly about their humane animal welfare standard, which ensures that all of their chickens are humanely raised and compassionately handled in a minimal stress environment throughout their lives. Well, our investigator revealed a very different story. Again, and I'm going to just show a clip here, it was all standard practices, but you'll see chicks mangled on machinery, injured, macerated on their very first day of life, and what that means is that they are literally thrown into a machine that grinds them up alive in order to euthanize them.
In 2013, a compassion over killing investigator worked inside a chicken hatchery owned by Bell & Evans, a company that advertises its A compassion over killing investigator worked inside a chicken hatchery owned by Bell & Evans, a company that advertises its high animal welfare standards. According to Bell & Evans, newly hatched chicks are, quote, humanely raised. This undercover video shows the reality inside a Bell & Evans hatchery. You decide, does this look humane to you? Just as these chicks are welcomed into the world, some will face a gruesome fate. Just hours old, birds who are sick, injured, or otherwise deemed unfit to be raised for their meat are tossed aside. Then, while still fully conscious, are dumped into a high-pressure macerator that grinds them up alive. This machine works much like a blender. Metal gears or blades tear their bodies into pieces, pulverizing them. Bell & Evans alleges that chicks enjoy a minimal stress environment and that their birds are compassionately handled. This undercover video tells a different story, showing chicks on their first day of life who should be bonding with their mothers and their nestmates, forced to endure a rough and mechanical process that jostles them around as if mere inanimate objects. Is this compassionate or humane? No matter how it may be advertised to consumers, animal abuse is standard practice in the meat industry. Thankfully, each of us can stand up for animals every time we sit down to eat, simply by choosing to leave them off of our plates. TryVeg.com.
So, as you can see, standard practices themselves, while legal, can also be very inhumane. Since I've done a lot of talking about the importance of undercover investigations to groups such as COK, I just wanted to briefly mention ag laws. I won't go into too much detail because I know there's a panel on this very issue later today, but I just wanted to give some context and say that this is the form of pushback from the agricultural industry that was terrified of being exposed by undercover investigations. So ag laws work by criminalizing an undercover investigator's documentation of abuses at factory farms, and have been passed in Utah, Iowa, and Missouri in 2012. Fortunately, in 2013, animal advocacy groups have been successful in defeating all 11 bills that were introduced in various states. And here's just a map showing the 6 states in purple are the ones where ag-gag laws are currently in place, and green indicates where the laws have been defeated. So I want to quickly conclude by saying that I hope I've made clear factory farming is a big, difficult, and important problem. Fortunately, we have creative ways that we can combat factory farming with farm to animal litigation. As I hope the business practices law example illustrates, where animal law is a very young field of law that has a lot of room for growth and creative new approaches. And so if any of you are ever interested in volunteering, doing pro bono work, or maybe interning in the future if there are any current legal students here, we'd be very happy to have your help. And you can reach me, the contact information here, follow us on Facebook or Twitter, and thank you so much for your time and attention.
Good morning. My name is Amy Gong. I'll be talking about Proposition 2 today, and just going through some of the language of the statute so you can get a better idea of what it actually does cover and what it doesn't cover. So we're going to take a closer look at what is better known as Prop 2. Prop 2 was a ballot initiative passed in California in 2008. It aims to set standards in place for the confinement of farm animals and is set to become effective in 2015. So it doesn't ban the confinement or even keeping animals in cages. It just sets standards on how you can do it for certain animals. The language of Prop 2 is here. A person shall not tether or confine any covered animal on a farm for all or the majority of any day in a manner that prevents such animal from lying down, standing up, and fully extending his or her limbs and turning around freely. And we'll take a look at some of this language because, like any law, there's a lot of definitions that aren't necessarily what you might think it is. First, we'll talk about what a covered animal is. A covered animal is a pig during pregnancy, a calf raised for veal, or an egg-laying hen is kept on a farm. A pig during pregnancy also has a definition. It's a pregnant pig kept for the primary purpose of breeding. So it not only sets standards for how they're kept, and you'll see here in the picture, there's a gestation crate, which Lisa has already talked about, but it also sets standards and identifies what the purpose is, and not just the purpose, but the primary purpose. There's been some criticism from both sides, from both people who are activists, because that kind of narrows the scope down of what it covers, and also some farmers and lawsuits that we'll talk about, just because it becomes vague and also almost, preempts what you're going to do because it talks about the purpose of it. But I think one of the things that this aims to cover are larger operations, to where it would be difficult to kind of mask what the purpose is of why you're keeping the animals. As I said, the language is that it only covers a pregnant pig. So here's a pig in a farrowing crate. It would not cover this pig in the language because she's not pregnant anymore. She now has had her babies, and she's in a similar enclosure to the gestation crate, but it's not covered under Prop 2. Next is a calf raised for veal. So any calf kept for the purpose, again you have a purpose language there, for producing the food product described as veal. Also covers egg-laying hens, so female domesticated chicken, turkey, duck, goose, guinea fowl, again kept for the purpose of egg production. Next, we'll look at what lying down, standing up, and fully extending his or her limbs means. So it's fully extending all limbs without touching the side of an enclosure. This is a picture of a hen in a battery cage. In this picture, you just see one hen here. In some battery cages, you'll see several hens packed in there. Typically, a battery cage only gives them about the size of a sheet of paper, an 8x11 sheet of paper space. So what Prop 2 would do is just give them a little more space so they can spread their wings and not touch the side of an enclosure. Next we have turning around freely. Turning around freely is turning in a complete circle without impediment, including a tether, and without touching the side of an enclosure. So you'll see these pigs here in gestation crates obviously cannot turn around at all. They can barely walk back and forth. And then here you'll see some calves that are being raised for veal. It would not cover these calves. What it's covering is calves that have tethers. So it's pretty much just a rope tied around their neck to something so they can't move at all. They can't walk, turn around, and really have, very minimal mobility. So it would not cover these calves. These pictures are from Joanne MacArthur. She's a photographer with We Animals. She has wonderful pictures. And in the caption on her website of this picture, after she went here and photographed them, this calf on the right died soon after. Which you can tell he doesn't look like he's in good shape there. There's another picture of a veal calf. There are criminal penalties, misdemeanor and a fine not to exceed $1,000 or imprisonment in the county jail for a period not to exceed 180 days, or by both fine and imprisonment. That covers not just individuals, but also business entities. Since Prop 2, there's been other welfare laws passed in California. There's a ban on selling shelled eggs. One of the reasons for that was the health of the hens in battery cages, because they're packed in there so tightly, and there can be a lot of illness from the hens. That also comes into effect in 2015, the same as Prop 2. There's also been a foie gras production and sales ban, and I won't go too much into what foie gras is because there's a whole panel on that today. Is this another panel? I know there's someone speaking just on foie gras. That was both a production just in California and a sales ban. There's also been some lawsuits that have been found favorably for Prop 2, and we'll cover one of those. Other states have also passed statutes similar to Prop 2. Some of them were before, but most of them were after. One of the differences between those states is the animals that they cover. You'll see that only one other state covers battery cages, which is Michigan. The others cover, they all cover gestation crates, and most of them cover veal crates. A lawsuit that was recently decided in California about Prop 2 was the Association of California Egg Farms versus the state of California. This was filed in Fresno. The court just decided this in favor of the state of California just in August of 2013. Humane Society of the United States was an intervener, and the Association of Egg Farms filed a lawsuit trying to get declaratory and injunctive relief against the enforcement of Prop 2, and this was under not the U.S. Constitution, but the California Constitution, alleging it was vague and violated their rights under the Due Process Clause of the California Constitution. They brought challenges to it both on its face and as applied, but the court found that they couldn't bring as applied challenges because it doesn't become effective until 2015. So they just looked at the on its face challenges. The court held that Prop 2 was constitutional. We also have a recent decision on the foie gras lawsuit. This was in the Ninth Circuit in California, and this was also decided in August. Canadian foie gras farmers and a New York restaurant sought also an injunction against the enforcement of the foie gras ban. The court found that, well, they just brought the lawsuit under the sales ban, not the production, because none of them produce foie gras in the state of California. So it wouldn't apply to them anyway. They alleged that it violated the U.S. Constitution because it violates the Due Process Clause and also the Commerce Clause. The Ninth Circuit affirmed the district court, which found for the state of California, they found that it was not unconstitutional and it was within the powers of California to set laws in place for animal cruelty standards. So it'll be interesting to see what these lawsuits, what authority they have on lawsuits that are filed later once the ban becomes effective in 2015. There's been a lot of criticism of Prop 2, both with people within the animal protection movement and people outside of it. One of the big cons within the animal movement is kind of the welfare versus abolition discussion, which is a whole panel on that. So if you stick around to the end of the day, you're going to hear a lot more in-depth look on that. But some of the pros are that it's increased visibility of farmed animals and really increased discussion of farmed animals, how they're kept. It's really educated people about the way that farmed animals are raised. They are incremental changes, even though they just set standards for really the most egregious forms of raising farmed animals that there are. Some of the cons is that the coverage is really narrow. I mean, it just covers animals in just a few circumstances and only for certain periods of the day that they're kept like that, because it only has to be all or majority of the day. The phasing period is pretty long. It was passed in 2008 and it doesn't become effective until 2015. So it's kind of a long time. It gives a lot of time for people to try to invalidate it, which there have been other lawsuits filed before the recent one in California. And the courts have held that Prop 2 is constitutional. One of the arguments we heard later today is that it validates the use and confinement of animals. So instead of banning it, it just kind of it validates it, saying that it's okay to keep animals confined like that, rather than really helping the animals not be confined. And that kind of goes along with the view that incremental change can be misleading because consumers will think that something has happened that hasn't because Prop 2 was passed. Of course, we can't ignore some of the consumers and farmers' views on that too, that it would be more expensive, that it's just difficult and again more expensive to make those changes in the farms, as well as the price of food, and it's unconstitutional, which we've seen in lawsuits. So today, that has given you a little more understanding of what Prop 2 is and the other laws that have been passed in that state. They have pretty similar language. I think my information is in the packet, so if you have any questions about Prop 2 or farmed animals, or just about animal law in general, or the ABA Animal Law Committee, feel free to email me, or if you have any questions, you can ask me after the panel. Thank you.
Well, good morning, and thank you all for coming. Before starting out, I would like to thank DePaul University for giving me the opportunity to participate. I'd also like to recognize Judy Randolph, who had something to do with the fact that I'm here. I understand there are some students here getting extra credit, and I welcome you, and I don't think I've ever spoken before a group that actually got credit for showing up, so I'm really encouraged about that. And I'd like to recognize my daughter, Virginia Parks, who is providing me moral support and teaches at the University of Chicago. It's interesting to me to hear the first two presentations and also to get I didn't really understand exactly what I was participating in, but I think I found my niche. I come from the other end of how we got to where we are, and that is in farm animal agriculture, or the way it's really viewed today as production animal agriculture. So I hope I can provide you a little background about how it is we got here, and also some of the ways that we helps us provide a basis for how we understand farm animal welfare and their uses by society. So just briefly to give you some background about who I am, I'm a veterinarian from Colorado, a 1972 graduate from Colorado State University. My entire life has been spent in farm animal practice, primarily beef cattle and dairy cattle. I've also, years ago, worked in, as I started practice, it was all family farms and ranches, and over my career that's evolved into doing a lot of feedlot work. I've worked in large-scale dairy production, and I've also been inside those pig barns you looked at and spent a few years there. So that, in a way, is just to establish my credentials about what I know about this from the other end, not the law end. My view of farm animal welfare has changed over my career. I was fortunate to spend a few years of practice in New Zealand, and there I met a gentleman by the name of Henry Bishop, who was a graduate of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons in England. And I remember distinctly working with Henry on a project, and there were some issues coming up in New Zealand dairy production that I kind of wondered, what are we as veterinarians doing in this area? And Henry's response was, Tom, remember, we are veterinarians, not animal scientists. And that has stuck with me forever. It's totally different than the kind of training that I was exposed to at Colorado State University. I met other veterinarians trained in the UK, and they had just a totally different perspective on their responsibility towards animals. And then the other person that has really impacted my view of farm animal welfare is Vern Rollins, who has written a book called Farm Animal Welfare. It came out in 1995, and these two gentlemen have really had a huge influence on how my views about farm animal welfare has evolved. So to talk about farm animal welfare specifically, I view farm animal welfare as the hub of a wheel. And farm animal welfare is at the hub, and all of the problems that we face with industrialized agriculture are spokes of that wheel. And there are many issues. This isn't meant to be limiting in any way, but I usually think about labor issues, environment issues, food safety issues, and family farms and ranches. And you can add many others in there. The basis of farm animal welfare really evolves, I believe, around the notion of telos, and that is the physiologic and psychological nature of animals. That is their telos. And from those natures evolve interests. And those interests have been looked after by man for the last 10,000 years in an extensive animal agriculture system. And they in those systems, they took care of animals. They allowed animals to express their physiological and psychological nature, such as chickens like to scratch at the dirt, they like to spread their wings, pigs like to root in the soil, cows prefer a grass-based diet over a grain-based diet. So in that view then, we can look at how industrialized farming has changed all that, completely took that away. And so I'd like to, because of limits of time, I'll just talk about two issues that come up on the farm animal wheel, and the first one of those is food safety. As it was already mentioned, especially and I think in in poultry production, pig production, we use a lot of things to try to mitigate the problems that occur when we confine animals in these extremely dense populations, such as the broiler cages, the egg-laying cages, the gestation crates. So in those instances, we have to do a lot of things to keep animals healthy. You're very familiar with antibiotic usage and overusage in farm animal production and how that leads to the resistance of antibiotics that we have now. Specifically, right now there's a very interesting issue going on in cattle production, and that's the use of a drug called ractopamine, which is a beta adrenergic that causes repartitioning of the animal going from fat to more lean meat. And it's a popular drug that is, as a feed additive, used in the last month or so of the feeding period in order to increase efficiency. Again, this is about production agriculture and getting more bang for your buck. Well, for a number of years it's been known that ractopamine has detrimental effects to animals, and it really affects them a great deal. Well, it's interesting to me that we even bother feeding it. Let's set aside although the FDA considers it safe for people, I think there are always questions about whether it really is. But recently, early in the summer, one of the large meat companies announced that it would start accepting cattle that were fed ractopamine, and that was because they couldn't get enough cattle into their production lines. And the reasons they didn't like it is it increased the toughness of meat protein. It made they lost a lot of tenderness. Well, they had to give up on that because they couldn't get enough cattle to market. Lo and behold, within about towards the end of the summer, one of the other 4 big meat companies in America announced that it was no longer accepting cattle that were fed ractopamine, and that was because it had come to light that there were serious animal welfare concerns with ractopamine. It affects the way the animals walk, and when they take these animals to slaughter, they end up walking very gingerly. They're obviously distressed, possibly in pain, and it was revealing to me that one of the experts in farm animal welfare made the comment that they had known that this problem existed since 2006, and yet it's only now that the industry is starting to do something or address it. Whether they'll do anything about it or not still remains to be seen. But that's an example of additives that we feed to animals all the time in order to either increase production, increase efficiency, and the bottom line is increase profit for the large meat companies. The effects of industrialized agriculture on family farms and ranches has been devastating. We've lost nearly all of our poultry production on family farms. It's 99 point some% now that's raised in these large barns. We've lost 90% of our pig farmers because of the what you saw in the video about Iowa. We've lost about 60% of our cow-calf producers, and we've lost about 90% of our dairy producers. And all that production now is going into very large-scale forms of agriculture. So when that happens, it destroys rural communities. It removes economic opportunity. It causes stagnation of wages and loss of population, and that's what's driving a lot of the loss of population in rural areas, it's a vital part of the country in terms of not only people but animals. And if we could restore animal production to farms and ranches, we could solve many of the problems that I've think about on the farm animal wheel. And the reason for that is that we would return to linking animals to the land, which is a natural symbiotic relationship. So we need to get animals back on the land, and that happens with family farms and ranches. If you get animals closer to the land where we recycle nutrients, sequester carbon, most or all of the labor is provided by the family, and they have an inherent culture of animal husbandry, which over time has taught them to do the right things for animals. And we solve the environmental influences that come with concentrating animals in very dense spaces in terms of water and land pollution. So there's some great benefits that we could get if we could return to a more extensive form of farm animal agriculture. In closing, I'd like to borrow from the racehorse industry. The racehorse industry is suffering some serious problems with animal welfare and the use of drugs and other things that are given to horses. And a quite well-known veterinarian who works on racehorses finally gave it up, said, I'm going to have nothing more to do with it. He said, we've taken a noble creature and commodified it. And I think that I view all animals that I work with in terms of pigs, chickens, and cattle especially, that they're all noble creatures. And when we confine them in battery cages or gestation crates or feedlots, we've commodified them. I think it's appropriate for society to use animal products, in society, but we have to recognize the animal's telos to provide proper care. I have to make one other comment here, and I regret that I didn't mention it right at the beginning. I am a member of the Cattlemen's Beef Board, and I support the goals and purposes of Beef Board, but I am not a spokesman today for the Beef Board, so thank you very much.
Good morning. Everybody awake still? Wave your hand. Still there? Okay, good. I'm Professor David Faber. Part of my introduction didn't tell you where I now live. I've been a professor of law for over 35 years and worked almost entirely in the area of animal law. But I now have lived for 10 years on a farm. And we raise Icelandic sheep as our primary, this is my wife's enterprise. I can't be a law professor and a farmer. But we also raise turkeys and Icelandic chickens and have a few llamas scattered in too. I've now experienced for over a decade living with non-pets and in a semi-commercial situation. It's different than having a dog and a cat. We have dogs and cats too. And I think that gives me a richness of experience that didn't exist. I know I would not be saying what I'm going to say today if I simply continued to live in suburbia where I had grown up. And I hope that all of you that live in the urban areas and suburban areas get the chance to meet some farm animals. I'm also the editor and creator of animallaw.info, largest website in the world that has all the legal information you'll ever want to know and some you don't even want to know on both U.S., but with a primary concentration on the United States, but also on a global basis. That's my advertisement. There's some of my Icelandic sheep, amazing creatures. I suspect some of you might be vegans, and I want to assure you that I fully respect the vegan lifestyle and that life choice, and I'm hoping that you will show some respect to my lifestyle and my choice. I totally reject industrial agriculture and would be happy to eliminate it tomorrow if I could, but I can't. And one of the things that I have noted over the years with these kinds of panels is there was a very good reason why she showed those clips, but the showing of death, destruction, horrible conditions. Almost never does any of these panels show a nice animal, a good life for an animal. And that's part of the question we have here is this, do we simply want to eliminate the bad? Are we going to try to create an alternative good place? And Dr. Parks had, I think, the right idea, and that is we need to get back to, this is my conclusion, I'll go ahead and give you up front, we need to get back to the true family farm. We need to put the animals back on the ground, in the pasture, with people who see them on a daily basis and can accommodate their needs and deal with them and provide them the care that they need. To move us to that point, I would like to go back to the basics, and that is, what is a good ethical construct in which to think about the development of animal law, particularly animal law in the agricultural setting. And to step back to that point, you must first cross through a door. And that door is, are animals ethical beings? Do they deserve our consideration as a matter of ethics? Not economics, ethics. Well, we consider the world of ethics is populated with those that are ethical beings. And who do we let in? I suspect everybody in this room has let some animals into their world of ethicalness, and it's all the rest of the world I need to talk to about, right? So I'm sort of preaching to the choir here. But I'm hoping I can give some construct to what you've already thought. And so what is the threshold? We don't let our computer into the world of ethical beings. It's a thing. Animals are not things, they're beings in that they are alive. Now there's also a lot of argument in the world of philosophy and in the press about, well, some animals should be in that and some should not. And do they have consciousness? Do they feel pain? You know, all sorts of line drawing goes on. Steve Wise has a marvelous book out, Drawing the Line, in which he spends a whole book trying to decide which animals are ethical beings and which ones aren't. Jeremy Bentham is a touchstone for this, and his point is, can they feel pain? As a lawyer and a pragmatist, I sort of go with the pain and whether or not you're a vertebrate. For purposes, my personal ethic would also include those that don't, but from a public discussion point of view, I think the public is willing and understanding to talk about ethical beings as those that are vertebrate animals. And if we could do that, what an amazing step forward, right? And after 20 years of thinking about this, I have come to this ethical construct as the touchstone for how I proceed. And that is that all animal-human interactions shall occur only on the basis of respectful use. Inherent in that phrase is that it is acceptable to use an animal. That actually is something you have to think about. Because clearly I have in mind something more than just a pet, a companion animal. We use others all the time. We use things and we use beings. We use our children. We use our colleagues. The word use is not inherently a negative thing. There's good use and bad use, okay? So to say that you use something, in my mind, is not to say that that's something inappropriate. We use our animals for emotional support. I think most people find that a positive use, a good use, a use to be promoted. We use our chickens to produce eggs that we eat. We eat our own chicken eggs, and we give them away. And we have roosters, which means we have baby chicks when they decide to have baby chicks. It's not up to us. We also know there's disrespectful uses. Dogfighting in American culture has been about as firmly set as inappropriate act as any animal use we can think of. You cannot find people publicly justifying dogfighting anymore. Michael Vick sort of put the nail in the coffin on that one. That was the one and only time I was invited on an ESPN radio to discuss an animal issue was when Michael Vick had his dogfighting enterprise. And that sort of just raised the consciousness of the entire country, who then looked behind the door of what this was and got some details, and everybody said, no, we don't like that door. That is disrespectful use. It's illegal. It's a felony. Okay, so some disrespectful uses we make criminal. And so we need to think about that. We move from ethics to law. First, you got to have the ethical proposition, then you move to the legal proposition. What is respectful? It is when you as an individual acknowledge in your head the other, that that is a being. I can't make you do that. And people show respect but may not feel respect, which you can learn the pattern of respect to avoid social conveniences. But respect really means that it is in you. I can't, you know, this is, the law can't make you be respectful. Respectful is something inside. And do you show respect for your siblings, for your mother, oops, right, for your dog, for the chickens? If you have that in your head, then you will inherently take into account their interest, which presupposes you understand they have interest, which they're telos, absolutely. Okay? So you have to know who they are and understand what their needs are. You know, the 2-year-old child that can't yet give their needs, but you understand they have needs, and you educate yourself about what those needs are and how you can help best fulfill those. Acknowledgement, understanding, but finally change of conduct. Do you change what you do because of the acknowledgement and respect for the other being? Spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, respectful use. Do you show respect? We have, if you move down that road of respectful use, it inherently brings with it the need to balance the interests. You have interest too. The other being has interest. You engage in conduct that might be more beneficial to you than it is to the other. You can't always do what you might do for your pet. Sometimes the pet has to take a hit because you have to do something. You can't get home in time to do the optimum feeding. It has to win. I think there's 3 different things that are, it's a weird balance. Animal welfare, the interest of the animal, your personal interest, but then we have this ugly thing in the room called money. Okay? If we're talking about a companion animal, since most companion animals have almost no economic value whatsoever, in fact we all know they cost you money, right? You're not ever going to make money off your pet. Then that sort of goes away, and you simply have a balance between animal welfare and your personal values, and each person works that out. But if you have a hog in a facility, economics becomes huge. And the difficulty is that then the animal welfare shrinks and the economics becomes overwhelming because there's no person there. Right? There's no human being that looks at that pig and says, well, that's my pig, I need to take care of it. And so that makes the money become the dominant factor in what happens. And so what we need to do is reestablish that balance where there is a human who can consciously take on the respectful use of the animals, not a corporation with thousands and thousands of facilities on a global basis. Also, I'm not alone in thinking that the term respectful is a good and useful term to use about animals. The Universal Declaration of Animal Rights has as Article 2, all animals have the right to be respected. Universal Declaration of Animal Welfare, recognizing that animals are living sentient beings and therefore deserve due consideration and respect. Neither one of these documents further elaborate on that. What does it mean to do that? But I'm trying to. Many animal presentations, talking about farm animals, want to focus on death, the bad day. blood, gore, horrible stuff. They never talk about the days before that, the years before that. What was the life like for that animal? If you're going to have commercial animals, you're going to have death. If you're going to have any animal, you're going to have death. Do you want a world with animals or without animals? I reject the abolitionist position that there should be no animals of a domestic nature. I just feel it's wrong. Animals are good. These are one-day-old turkeys. They arrive in the postal system. You're called at 6:30 in the morning. Your turkeys are here. You run down to the post office and pick up a box of one-day-old turkeys. These are heritage breed turkeys, standard bronze, royal palms, some others. And I'm going to show you just a few seconds here in the first day, and then we're going to slip to August. This is my bathtub. They grow fast, but these don't grow as fast as the commercial ones, but turkeys just inherently grow fast. Notice the first thing they're doing when they come out is eat grass. They love to eat grass. I'm sorry my facility doesn't look like Martha Stewart's. It's the best I can do. These are pretty happy turkeys. That's a seek sound they're making. They're going to start hunting for things. This guy's displaying, sexual display. For some reason he thinks I'm a female. There's a female. Curiosity drives the turkey. They're very different than chickens. Chickens run from me and scream like mad. Turkeys come to me. They're going to my wife. They like to fly, get those wings out, feels good. Here they're being fed wild grapes that have turned ripe in our fence row. They love them. And they'll spend the afternoon outside in the fence row and in the barn. They don't have total free range. We have to let them out, and then we put them away at night for predator protection purposes. But most of those are going to end up on the dinner table on Thanksgiving. But that's the life that most of those turkeys that are sold in the food stores, that's what they have. I don't think that's respectful to the turkey. Another thing that is important to sort out as you construct how to think about all this stuff is there's also confusion about ideal practices versus ethical practices versus legal standards. Okay? And some people think that the law should demand the best possible condition for all animals. Well, maybe in Alice in Wonderland or someplace that might happen, but that's not the real world. So we think about best practices, ideal positions. But I have to also say, do I think that every turkey should be hand-fed grapes to have a good life? No, I think you can have ethical use of turkeys without having to go to that sort of really positive point. And then the question is, well, what is the legal practices that ought to be the floor? Law provides a floor, not the ceiling. We don't have any floors, as they pointed out. That one of our main problems is we don't even have the floor there yet for most of these agricultural animals. So if that's acceptable, how do we think about it in more detail? Well, the RSPCA back in the 60s developed these 5 freedoms. If you're familiar with agricultural issues, you probably have already run across these as goals, as ethical goals, and then legal goals as well. Freedom from hunger and thirst, freedom from pain, injury, disease, distress, discomfort, and freedom to express normal behavior. All right, now, this brings up Another thing I want you to think about when you're thinking about this ethics is you have two categories. You have the control and elimination of the negative, and you ought to have the creation of the positive. Okay? The first four of those are to control the negative. And the law tends to do that. The law tends to primarily focus on making sure bad things don't happen. But we also need to think about to what degree can we foster good things. All right? So the freedom to express normal behavior is much closer to being a positive. As a matter of ethics, I recently came up with this sentence as a way of expressing my ethical goal, and that is to allow these animals to live as natural life as possible in order that the animal can experience life as fully as possible, given its inherent interest and capabilities, the opportunity to be themselves. If the turkey can't get out and eat the grass and flap the wings, then it's not being able to fulfill itself. Obviously, it needs food, water, and shelter. The turkeys want to be in social groups. They want to hunt. They want to get out and form. Invariably, they form these phalanxes that march across a field to flush the insects so that they can eat. They like to fly. But of course, this is the one most difficult for us to deal with. All animals want to reproduce. It is driven into their DNA. That is why they exist, is to produce the next generation of that animal in their DNA's perspective. Balancing. Where is it most likely that these positive things can be obtained? Well, that picture, I think, gives you pretty close, If they're out in a field walking with a man, I have some hope that that is a place where the good can happen for the turkey as well as the elimination of the negative. But in a barn with 20,000 other birds, most of those birds have never been actually looked at individually by a human being. Nobody's aware of their existence. They are indeed commodified things. Understand that we develop our individual ethics. We then form groups around those ethics normally. And to the extent we are unhappy with how others don't respect our beliefs, we may seek to, by law, impose our ethical perspective on others. And that's a messy process, one that I assume most of you in the audience are aware of. In the first animal cruelty law of any consequence in the United States, the 1867 New York law by Henry Bird, we find that the law, you don't find the word respect in the law, right? Because it's really fuzzy. We can't demand that you respect your mother as a matter of law. Now, it's not going to work. Instead, the law has evolved around a phrase that was in this first law that is still the core of our social and legal perspective. And that is that it's inappropriate to inflict unnecessary or needless pain and suffering or death. One of the amazing attributes of this first statute was that it applied to any living creature. That was the first time it had been said in the United States. And I don't think they actually meant it. I don't think the New York legislature in 1867 had any idea what that phrase actually meant, but that's okay. The driving force behind the statute was horses that were cruelly mistreated in the streets of New York. That's what got the statute passed. We now have, this is from the Michigan, we now have a sense to create the positive too. We have stop the bad, create the positive. And the positive is a duty to care. If you're the owner, you must do certain positive things. Sufficient food, water, shelter, sanitary, you must exercise them. You must provide medical attention to maintain the animal in a good state of health. Positive duties for the benefit of the animal. The one that I find really interesting is the one hook in the federal law, the Animal Welfare Act, that was previously talked about as not applying to farm animals, which is true, in which it says that if you have a primate you must provide for the physical environment adequately to promote the psychological well-being. That's the first time I've seen a statute that acknowledged the mind of an animal, and that we would have a duty to enhance and promote that well-being. Well, all animals have a psychological aspect to them. But we were willing to, this is incrementalism of law, we were willing to talk about that as for primates. What can we do for turkeys? Well, get them out of those barns. Reestablish the family farm. If it means there's fewer turkeys to sell and market, fine with me. Do they cost another couple of bucks? Fine with me. Thank you. Hope I've given you something to think about.
All right, we have time for some questions for our panelists. Any questions?
I'm not a lawyer, I'm not involved, but I'm interested in this topic. I'm very curious about, there's been a lot of discussion about, family farms and doing away with concentrated feeding lots and that sort of thing. How do you propose that happens given, the mass amount that people consume each year? Is it 10 billion land animals in the United States each year? It's like, how does that change from just this kind of rosy-eyed ideal to an actual practice? I mean, like, I never hear people talk about consuming less, and I am interested to hear what you have to say. How does this become an actual reality given our land mass?
I'd like to answer it.
Yeah, we'll do it.
I can hear me. That's a great question, and whenever I present at things like this, primarily, well, in the Denver area, it's always ended by we, meaning farms and family farms and ranches. We can't do it by ourselves. We have to have consumers who drive this. And so the whole issue is about trying to heighten awareness amongst consumers, because family farms and ranches, if the other stuff all went away, we still would fail without a consumer-driven economy for animal protein, what we're talking about. There are some efforts to reduce the consumption of animal products, and a lot of that's coming now. Traditionally, it's come from the people who don't want to use or consume animal products. So that's one area. But I think David made a great point. We need to respect each other's choices in how we do that. And I do think that the medical community will drive that more and more as we find out the negative health consequences of over-consuming, particularly animal proteins. And of course, we see that in the popular literature and videos like Forks Over Knives and those kinds of things. And the Meatless Monday thing is all part of that. That originated from Johns Hopkins University, again from the medical school. So I think all of those together will help, but it's really going to have to be, in my view, a consumer-driven process.
Yes.
I guess I'm not the only non-lawyer in the room. I come from a biology background through a lot of other industries, and recently have become a practitioner in energy work and animal communication. Now, I don't presume that anytime soon we'll be using animal communicators to testify that animals actually do understand their part in the food chain as livestock. They just wish we would kill them more respectfully and individually, but that's my statement. What I'm curious about is whether any of you, as parts of the legal movement, to deal with this ethical situation, has there been testimony from the science community, because there's so much work being done in biology and genetics and physics, and biology particularly, on the question of sentience and cellular consciousness and that kind of thing. And I can tell you that, even ants have an oversoul, and communicators know this. So I'm curious as to how this is, if anywhere, getting into the process by which these ethical situations are addressed in courtrooms. Are there any scientists participating, or is it just too freaky woo woo?
As far as I know, and I can say, we procure expert statements to address investigations and things, and they'll often testify like, oh, here's a sign of consciousness, here's an animal that was improperly stunned, this is egregious abuse, this is a standard practice. We haven't, as of yet, had anybody say, talk about this sort of at the level that you're speaking of. Of course, we would welcome that if there, if there's science to back it up and people who can testify about that kind of thing. But I think certainly there's a space for that to join, into the animal movement. I think it's a valid point. I wish that there were more valid ways of testing how animals felt about, respectful use and things like that.
Yes, our science protocols are a little bit out of date. So.
Yes.
Am I understanding also, and I'm sorry, this is my follow-up, am I understanding that there is now an easier time of getting legal standing to defend the rights of other creatures? Because that used to be, I thought, a problem in courtrooms where they would say, well, animals can't speak for themselves, but neither can you as a human being. So is that changing?
No.
Oh, really? Okay.
There are more creative ways that humans have gotten standing under, like some of the laws you were mentioning. But that is sort of the golden touchstone for many in the animal rights movement is, can animals have standing? And the answer is at the moment they do not. It would take me, Howard, 50 minutes to go through a full explanation of where we are in that process. It's complicated.
I will say, too, just because I do litigation, and I think I mentioned too that our law office does pro bono work for the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And standing is always an issue when you file a lawsuit related to animals. It's always a challenge to find standing. And most of what we've seen when you file a lawsuit, the initial response from a defendant in a civil suit is some type of dispute on the basis of standing, like motion to dismiss or motion for summary judgment. So standing is always an issue, and something that activists are trying to overcome now. Other questions? Yes.
Yes, I would like to ask Professor David. I respect your opinion, and I think it's great to these turkeys that have already left and everything. But my question is, if we're talking about respect, of course, if we treat them that way, it's no respect. But with respect, in your case, your family raised them and take care of them. I personally can imagine raising something and get so attached, and then maybe in the future consume it. So as beings, they feel like we have this, regards when something is gonna happen. So if somebody is taking care of me and feeding me and taking me for walks and all that, but if that person is gonna hurt me, I probably will feel it when it happens. So my question is, how do you detach yourself of taking care of them, and then when Thanksgiving is coming, put them on your plate? And also, what would you consider a humane slaughtering in this case?
It took us 5 years of raising the sheep before we ate one. And I think that it is coming to accept that it is a part of a community that is different from pets. I actually disagree with you strongly that they have any inclination about what's coming. I have no idea that that's the case at all. Turkeys in particular, they don't have ideas about much of anything. But the sheep are much more intelligent, and no, you're wrong. You're taking a human being's perspective of the world and transposing it to an animal. It has not that mental capacity. It is hard to explain because it's a holistic experience. It's not a matter of logic. If we want to have Icelandic sheep on the farm, and if we want to breed them, which my wife wants to do, then you run into overcapacity issues. You know that not every male should be a breeding male. You make choices about what to do. And then the question, one of those choices is, well, are some of these going to have to be meat animals? And to run the ecology of a farm in an active way, not as a sanctuary, then some are surplus animals.
So how do these, how do they kill? Like how do their, like these turkeys has been?
They're shot.
With a shot.
Yes.
Well, I'd like to ask any of you that eat meat, I'm not a lawyer either, I'm a vegan, and I do respect everyone's opinion, but we know, many of us know that you can not only live, but be healthy and have wonderful food on a vegan diet. If you're concerned, and you obviously are concerned about the lives and feelings of animals, why do you want to eat them?
I don't eat meat and haven't since I was 5, so I can't answer that.
Well, I'll make an attempt. This is one of those, it's a difficult topic. I understand that, or an issue. I do think that at some point we just have to accept that we have a difference of opinion here. I would go back to my original definition of telos, and that is that animals have natures and they have interests that flow from those natures, but they do not have rights. And I agree completely with David. They are completely unconscious about the end of their lives. There is no, I mean, I think there's a danger here of anthropomorphizing animals, and I do believe, and this is where we just, I guess, have to accept the fact that we disagree, is that there is an absolute difference there. But in terms of while they are here and their natural life, whether it's a few weeks for a chicken, or it's years for a cow, or months for a pig, I think that it's that time that's important, that we respect these natures and provide for their interests.
I don't think that, but I think her question was why would you eat them? Am I right? Was that your question?
Yeah, basically.
I think it's a perfectly natural thing.
Question?
Yeah, so my question really has to do with sort of the root origins of animal production in our contemporary sort of world. I draw those root origins right here to the Midwest, to grain production. Wondering about your thoughts, anybody, on whether animals as food and the legal treatment would change dramatically if the U.S. would participate in the rest of the world's erasure of food subsidies to the grain industry, and that the whole basis of the discussion is really built on the production process, which is built on our tax system, which heavily subsidizes grain production and corn and soy right here in the Midwest being the primary basis of that. And whereas the rest of the world is pressured to not participate in that production subsidy process, we seem to, in some would say, in an illegal sense, internationally, have that contradictory policy.
Absolutely. If you want to do something, the other questions raised, what do we do about this now? Given that most of the United States are not going to become vegans, this is not going to happen, then you want to start to take apart that industry. And I do agree with you, the base of that industry is the subsidization of corn production, because that makes that commodity, they have to find more and more places to utilize that commodity. It's not just the corn, there's all sorts of, you look at the federal Department of Agriculture and what they do and where do they spend their money and what do they do? Well, it's all self-promotion of industrial agriculture. And what if those people were hired in order to support family farms instead of that? And you look at all the subsidies that go out there for the various prospects, and it's the big corporations that suck up all that money. It's not the little guy that's trying to make a decent living for an individual family. But you have to be really careful with the term family farm, because when I say family farm, I mean farms in which the owner of the animals sees those animals. But there are many family farms that are basically large corporations. The corporate stock is owned by a particular family of individuals, but they're a corporation, and they act like a corporation in that they're not looking at those animals. They are maybe all sorts of places and everything else. So I'm very careful about using the word family farm. It can mean different things to different people.
Can I add some comment to that? And partly this is just adding, I hope, maybe a little context, not answering the question so much, because you're absolutely right about how one system feeds on the other. You know, our monoculture, row crop agriculture fits in with animal production. But one of the things that drives that in the agricultural industry is that we have to feed the world. They have this notion that we're going to, you know, what we do is important because we feed the world, and that really just means how do we sell more stuff. That's what it amounts to. There's an interesting study came from an advocacy group in Ottawa, Canada, that indicated that this feed the world notion is rather silly. It turns out that in America we produce about 30% of the world's food with 70% of the resources, and that actually peasant agriculture in the rest of the world raises 70% of the food on a worldwide basis with 30% of the resources. So I mean, it's a flawed system, but it's a difficult system too, because just to throw another number at you, I've just recently read that in China, individual pork consumption is up to 80 pounds per person. This is a worldwide problem that's going the opposite direction about what we're talking about today. You think that's stunning. 80 pounds. I mean, in America, of course, we eat about 200 pounds of animal protein a year, which is, you know, obscenely high. But when you think about a country the size of China eating 80 pounds and increasing, that's why they bought the largest pork producer in America now, so that they can take our cheap, unaccounted, I mean cheap because they unaccount for a lot of their costs, raise it here and ship it to China.
I think we're scheduled for a coffee break right now, so I want to thank our panelists, and we'll reconvene about